In 1860, a French naturalist was cutting his way through the Cambodian jungle in search of exotic insects. Henri Mouhot suddenly came across the last thing he was expecting, a massive complex of stone temples. Mouhot had stumbled across one of the world's most astonishing and enduring architectural feats, the 900-year-old remains of Angkor Wat. But who built these vast, sophisticated temples? Why construct them deep in the jungle only to abandon them? At first, there were no answers. Then, an amazing eyewitness account from the 13th century emerged in China. The author describes the great temple of Angkor, a fantastic citadel, and its resourceful inhabitants. But was it accurate? The evidence was scant. Now, science is providing unexpected proof. Archaeologists are applying the latest techniques to reveal the mysteries of Angkor. And radar images from space reveal that Angkor was much bigger than originally imagined, a vast city the size of Los Angeles. Scientists now know that Angkor Wat was just a small part of one of the largest and most sophisticated cities in the world. Angkor Wat, one of the world's true enigmas, its size and purpose baffling. Larger than any monument, it is truly one of the greatest structures ever built. Its towers, shaped like lotus flowers, were raised 100 years before the Cathedral of Chartres in France. The buildings are laid out on a vast scale, stone shrines ascending one upon the other, as if reaching for the heavens. Endless corridors are carved with the longest reliefs in the world. The precise construction would be hard to match, even with the lasers used by modern surveyors. Archaeologist Charles Hyam has studied all aspects of Angkor and its inhabitants, the Khmer. Professor Hyam has been crucial to understanding the extraordinary history of this ancient culture.
We're standing in the middle of the world's largest religious monument. It's absolutely gigantic. It stretches on and on. Angkor Wat was the temple mausoleum of one of Angkor's greatest kings, King Suryavarman II, the Sun King. And when he died, his ashes would have been placed under the heart of the central lotus tower behind me.
Angkor Wat, meaning holy temple, is symbolic in every way. Its vast square moat represents the oceans around Mount Meru, legendary home of the Hindu gods. When Henri Mouhot stumbled across Angkor in 1860, he wrote, "One of these temples, a rival to that of Solomon and erected by some ancient Michelangelo, might take an honorable place beside our most beautiful buildings. It is grander than anything left to us by Greece or Rome." The Frenchman suspected that the temples belonged to a huge and sophisticated civilization, but he had no evidence. Angkor Wat lies in the northwest floodplains of Cambodia, just above the Great Lake. When Mouhot discovered it in 1860, only a handful of Buddhist monks and local villagers lived around the ancient site. None of them knew how Angkor Wat had evolved or who had built it. Legend had it that the Great Temple had built itself. Some said that it had always been there. In Europe, the publication of Muho's journal created a sensation. Soon, a stream of explorers, photographers, and archaeologists traveled east, keen to uncover the mysteries of this vanished world. But Muho's part in this puzzle came to a sudden end. Bitten by a poisonous insect, he died in the jungle a year after discovering the incredible sight. As other early explorers began to strip away the jungle, they discovered even more temples. The walls of the vast monuments were covered in intricate carvings. These reliefs illustrate legends of an ancient culture and its religion. The sandstone sections were carved in place. They would have taken the artists decades to complete. Inscriptions here are written not only in an ancient Cambodian language, but also, mysteriously, in Sanskrit, the priestly language of the Hindus.
One of the great breakthroughs has been the translation of the entire corpus of Angkorian inscriptions by a French scholar, Georges Sedez, in 7 thick volumes. And so, bit by bit, the actual internal history of Angkor has been unraveled, and that's been absolutely critical.
To the code breakers, they disclosed that for 6 centuries, Angkor had been the capital of the Khmer, the indigenous people of Cambodia. Between the 9th and 15th centuries AD, a total of 38 kings ruled their empire from Angkor. Its borders reached from southern Vietnam to Laos, and from the Mekong River to eastern Burma. But whose grand vision was this great city? And why was it built in the middle of the jungle? The deciphering continued. Then an astonishing discovery was made. A junior Chinese official on a diplomatic mission visited Angkor in the summer of 1296 AD. During his year-long visit, Zhao Daguan kept a journal. His diary tells of a major civilization, a capital much bigger and more developed than the archaeologists dared imagine. But was Zhao Daguan's account fact or myth? Archaeologists searched for proof of the existence of the city Zhao described. As they pieced together this gigantic puzzle, the full story began to emerge. For thousands of years, the indigenous Cambodians, the Khmer, had cut rice fields from the jungle. These farmers were a largely self-contained and peaceful people. But from the 1st century AD, small feuding kingdoms developed around the country. In the 8th century, a great leader emerged. To find a site for a grand new sacred capital, he abandoned his home city in the eastern part of Cambodia and ordered all his subjects to cross the Mekong River in a great march westward. Having conquered his rivals, he chose the lush land between the sacred Kulen Hills and the Great Lake for his new citadel. In 802 AD, he had himself crowned Jayavarman, the supreme world emperor, king of kings. Jayavarman's charisma won the people over. He came not only to rule by divine consent, but to be worshipped as a god himself. This great and charismatic leader changed the course of Cambodian history. Over the next 500 years, Jayavarman's descendants, living gods, succeeded him to reign in Angkor. Each Jayavarman's descendants, living gods, succeeded him to reign in Angkor. Each king had his own monument built to his glory, destined to become his mausoleum. Since the 2nd century AD, the Khmers had practiced Hinduism. Each of the royal temples is modeled on the 5 peaks of Mount Meru, the home of the Indian gods. For their builders, the shrines were a celebration of religion, art, science, and power. The largest religious monument in the world, the city of the gods, Angkor Wat in the heart of Cambodia. But is this astonishing temple only the visible tip of a greater, unseen mystery? 700 years ago, a junior Chinese official visited Angkor on a diplomatic mission. During his 11-month stay with a Cambodian family, he recorded many aspects of life in Angkor. For 100 years, French archaeologists were too busy restoring the temples to pay the journal much attention, so it was largely ignored. Then, in the 1970s, the murderous regime of Pol Pot stopped all work at Angkor. His army of communist revolutionaries, the Khmer Rouge, laid thousands of landmines around the site, rendering it off limits for years. Now at last, stability has returned to Cambodia, and work on the temples has resumed. Today, Angkor has World Heritage Site protection, with a dozen countries funding archaeological research. With much of the major restoration work complete, the focus has shifted away from the temples at the center and onto the outlying pieces of the puzzle. Just north of Angkor Wat, an 8-mile wall encloses the remains of several magnificent stone temples. Explorer Henri Mouhot suspected in 1860 that this was once the Khmer's great capital of Angkor Thom, the holy city. The perfectly square wall, like Angkor Wat, is surrounded by a moat and covers an area the size of Manhattan. At its center is the Bayon Temple. In his journal from 1296, Zhao Daguan describes a busy city teeming with life. Archaeologists are now looking for evidence that this is the great metropolis he was describing. But any evidence has all but vanished under dense forest. In the last 2 years, archaeologist Jacques Gaucher has started to excavate the interior of the walled city.
When I started this study, we knew almost nothing because everything was covered in forest. The only surviving features were the stone temples and the foundation of a royal palace, but we knew nothing of the rest of the 900 hectares within the city wall.
For a while, it seemed that Gaucher was fighting a losing battle, but his persistence is at last producing results.
2 ans après une étude systématique,
After 2 years of very difficult research, we've at last begun to build an impression of this city.
l'histoire de cette ville.
Gaucher is plotting thousands of coordinates onto an ever more detailed map of Angkor Thom. He is now able to trace an intricate grid system of canals and roads, together with the sites of thousands of wooden houses. Back in 1860, when Henri Mouhot discovered Angkor Wat, he had suspected that it was just part of a complex city. Zhao Daguan's 13th century journal alludes to a political and religious citadel. Now, at last, archaeologists have enough evidence to bring to life this extraordinary city as it looked 700 years ago. Angkor was a capital far bigger and far in advance of any European city of the time. Jacques Gaucher's findings confirm the accuracy of Zhao Daguan's account. What he describes is fact, not fantasy.
These are the monuments which have caused merchants from overseas to speak so often of Cambodia, the rich and noble. If you are looking for gold lions, gold Buddhas, bronze elephants and bronze horses, this is where you'll find them.
From the inscriptions, archaeologists know that Angkor Thom, the holy city, was built nearly a century before Zhao arrived by the Khmer's greatest monarch. Jayavarman VII ruled over Cambodia between 1181 and 1219. Known as the Great Builder King, he expanded the empire further than any other Khmer ruler. Within the city walls, the king built a palace befitting his mighty empire.
The royal palace stands to the north of the Golden Tower. Lintels and columns, all decorated with carved and painted Buddhas, are immense. The roofs too are impressive. Long colonnades and open corridors stretch away, interlaced in harmonious relation.
Jacques Gaucher's excavations at the royal palace confirm Zhao's account.
On a trouvé une série de structures en bois qui étaient en place.
We found evidence that this palace was a large area with interconnecting courtyards and buildings. We found holes 80 centimeters in diameter for huge supporting columns. It would have been a very impressive sight.
As evidence materializes about the royal palace, the role of the Khmer's rulers, these earthly gods, becomes clearer. During his stay, Zhao Daguan had several audiences with the ruling king.
Every time I was admitted to the palace for an audience with the king, he came forward with his chief wife and took his place in the embrasure of the golden window in the main audience hall.
Zhao himself came from a culture with a ruler elevated to godhood. The Chinese approved of the Khmer's devotion.
These people know what is due a king.
The king topped a social pyramid that stretched down to the lowest peasant. The monarch's potency showed itself in a legend Zhao Daguan relates.
Out of the palace rises a golden tower, to the top of which the ruler ascends nightly to sleep. It is common belief that in the tower dwells a genie, formed like a serpent with 9 heads, which is lord of the entire kingdom. Every night, the genie appears in the shape of a woman with whom the sovereign couples. Should the genie fail to appear for a single night, it is a sign that the king's death is at hand. If the king should fail to keep his tryst, disaster is sure to follow.